Hey, so along with certain previous video things I've done, and sort of in the vein of the walkthrough history and walkthrough aid history, etc., looking at my collection, my pile of games, and kind of as the lens to look at different historical periods, decided, well, what would be meaningful to look at least to some people, from another lens? What's some other concept that I can bring into play and say, okay, here's a slice of gaming, especially in my life, in particular. And I wanted to try opening this up. I don't know how many I'm going to do of this series, but this will be a new series on, I think, game designers and how they've influenced my gaming. I can't do, for almost any designer, a real sort of tribute or dig into all their history. And I wanted to open things up with, I think, what's been the most influential game designer on my gaming history. I don't know. There may be some competitors a little behind, but in this case, I'm choosing to look at Richard Berg. Now, it's kind of funny because it seems like people have sort of, I guess with a lot of designers, you either love their style or you hate it. And in Berg's case, I've seen many games that I've really enjoyed come out of him, and a couple that maybe aren't so great. In fact, I can think of only, I mean, this is a man who made over 100 games. They've got him listed as credits for 140 on Board Game Geek. But, see, here's the kind of twisted thing. Some of those are unpublished prototypes, etc. And also the list may be not re-added. So I'm thinking, yeah, that's about right. All right. Anyway, it's probably in the general ballpark. He's also been involved in a few development aspects. He runs his own gaming con as well. What brought me to mind, one was the game I've got set up right now, Le Flat et Le Glaive, which is not a Richard Berg design, but I incidentally happen to have bought it off of him, which kind of, I don't know, made it kind of cool, you know. And then the other was, I'm reading the rules to a Famous Victory, which I haven't played yet, obviously, Battles of Blenheim and Ramillies, and I'm fairly impressed with what I'm seeing in this. Yet another take on this may be kind of where the chip pull systems are as well. There's something I haven't experienced yet, although I have Rigas Morento or Rigas or I should know how to pronounce something so important to Italian history, but unfortunately I'm really bad at remembering things that don't make a lot of sense to me. But I look over the list of games that he's written that I copied down off of the Geek, saying, well, what? Every one of these I have. What's going on with this? What's this? And I start looking through them, and even before this, it was obvious what an effect he's had. So, in fact, when I was young, he put out a couple of the games that I really loved from the very beginning. So one of his games, and a design based on one of his games, were in my very first set of games that I bought that were real war games. I had some kind of semi-war games, things like Skirmish by Milton Bradley, already there, which, you know, to me are at about the same level as some of the very light end war games that are called such today. But these were mass-produced and, you know, something available to all children, basically. I mean, I found out about it because some kids in my 5th grade class were playing it, and I wanted to play too. Whatever. All right. So, no, it had to be younger than that. Anyway, these war games that I picked up was a set of 7 games for $2 at a tailgate sale. An old SPI fan had just this tendency to get rid of his games after he'd play them out. There's no question. You could see these games were already worn and well played by the time I got them. But in the course of a year, he'd have played them enough, and he wanted to get rid of most of them. Which was an odd, that's never been me, and I will never understand that kind of mentality. But just, hey, I've got this one, I've understood it, I want to put it aside and out of my life. For me, I play it once, I put it aside out of my life, and then I come back to it in 2 years and play it again. And maybe I get insight over those years, maybe I don't, maybe I'm replaying the same thing. Certainly the videos have given me additional insight because of the talking into the game as I go. But in that first set, there were 2. One which was not even, the game was actually designed by Mark Herman. It's Stonewall, and I covered that recently. And that, though, was designed off of Terrible Swift Sword. And from that point on, you know, right at the very beginning of my wargaming, I looked and said, I want Terrible Swift Sword. I want this game. This game is so exciting to me. And then from there, the second one that was in there was very exciting to me as well. It was the old Crusades game. And that's intrigued me since then, and I've seen actually some of the ideas he had in that resurfacing, fixed, better. Oh, you know what else was in there? I think Siege of Constantinople was in that pack too. So there's a third, and another actually designed by Berg, which, you know, may not, again, be the perfect game to cover it, but I've had fun with this thing. And it covered something, you know, the idea of, this was sort of the flagship of the Art of Siege series. It covered something that is really not well covered, which is siege operations over, you know, a long period of time with the bombardments going on, breaking the walls. It's something I want to get to the table at some point soon, because I do think it's an underrated treasure. And in the same way, let's take a look at Crusades with plotted movement, which adds this whole layer, this whole new dimension of like not knowing, you know, you've got this simultaneous action going on. But at the same time, it's got this kind of weird, you can move as far as you like, you accrue attrition, which has been carried over into Onward Christian Soldiers and the Ancient World series. Those are my roofers. Say hi to them. All right. Yeah, I live in a wonderful, wonderful situation right now. Anyway, these this first pack of games, and in part, I link this directly to Berg, is what got me into the niche gaming. I probably would have found it somewhere, somehow, you know, through role-playing, through some other means. But from there, I found role-playing. I found the Starfleet battles type stuff that I would have had to find some other way first, and then maybe make my way back towards the wargaming type side of things. Or maybe I never would have. Maybe I would have stayed at that same area where I've met so many gamers and then brought them into heavier games, or in some cases even to wargaming. So let's look at some of the other stuff in a less, you know, less of a perhaps personal view here. Well, no, it's always going to be personal. But I'm looking through some of the rest. 13 Colonies, this was put out in the TSR set, TSR era of S&Ts. And it's an interesting game. It may well be actually the best of the strategic revolutionary war games that I've seen. Then again, maybe skirmishes. There aren't any good competitors for that title, really. The big thing to go up against here is 1776, which I've never liked very much. I love the ideas of that, but the execution didn't work as well, and there were some things about 13 that I remember working better, and I want to get that on the table again to see what it was I thought about it. But then again, I have to get 1776 there too. So many games to go. All right, what about another one from that era? Baton Rouge, city fighting in the street fighting in the or city fighting in the streets of Louisiana. This was such a cute idea. It took the TSS regular, move and shoot and everything, and then tried to apply it all to the city. What you ended up having is an innovative situation for the street fighting side of it that I think actually captures it very well. But mechanically, the game is a bit of a disaster. First of all, you start with the crappy TSR era quality, where the maps are somewhat glossy, the counters are glossy, everything slides all over the place. This might have worked on the old SPI era maps. But once you have that, you're kind of putting things, not really on the... So most of it, the game works within hexes like everything else, but here you're sitting on the hex sides with your pieces. And it's a design that enhances the clutter and really causes some serious issues in terms of the mechanics, in terms of the mechanical actions associated with the game to keep everything from spilling all over the place. And then there's this boat that can come sailing down and throw this huge monkey wrench into the Union's plan, or into the Union's plans. But totally random effect on that. It may show up, it may not. Now, jumping back quite a ways in terms of design-wise, back to Conquistador, which I think, was one of those... This is one of those games that's not just key to me, but was key to the hobby. And I think Berg has a number of these. Conquistador showed something that could be done with a standard wargame type feel that wasn't being done. It was this total bolt from the blue in terms of, wow, this is a totally different kind of game. And from there you started seeing a lot of innovation starting around that time. And I'm almost of a different kind. You had innovations coming from, say, a Frank Chadwick that changed the hobby heavily. You had innovations coming from Jim Dunnigan that changed the hobby. Well, here we have one from Berg that I think started adopting wargaming principles more and more to all kinds of different subjects. And you see Berg involved in such with things like the War of the Ring game and what else was he involved in? It was kind of twisted like that in that early era. Well, certainly things like Crusades have their own oddness. But walking out of just his stuff, I think you start seeing that influence on other games that were coming out, things like Barbarian Prince and stuff, that were kind of bridging that fantasy and wargaming gap. Not just in the, let's throw a bunch of orcs at panzers. What? No, there were games coming out using wargaming principles, or wargaming devised principles, inside a fantasy world in very different ways from, say, the War of the Ring map and board and pieces on it. War of the Ring is a good example with its character cards and all that going on that really captures that that tries to capture the flavor over just presenting a dry war game. You saw the dry war games coming out of that era as well, in the sense of, say, Divine Right, or maybe Dragon Pass. These games that were just fantasy-themed war games, and they're fine. They add, it's a subject area that I don't think has been explored well enough and deeply enough. But it was more exciting to see the innovations made to try to make things like Magic and character-based stories really work well, so that they're not just counters on the board anymore. Okay, let's take a look at what else we have here. I've got Famous Victory, yeah. Terrible Swift Sword's another one of those moments where I think The Hobbit, and it's odd for me to say Conquistador is, a fantasy, branching for the fantasy games, but I do see it that way. Here's another one. If you look at Europa Universalis, swinging all the way around, one of its prime credits, in addition to Empires in Arms, is to Conquistador, saying, look, this is a game about colonizing and building in a wargaming type feel. Well, when you got that, hey, let's merge them together and make, a big Empires in Arms game with that same flavor to it. Okay, so let's look again now at Terrible Swift Sword, which I think again was one of these really seminal moments where wargaming took a big turn, and I think in this case tremendously for the better. Tactical games before this felt like operational games for the most part. Exceptions, Squad Leader and Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader. Those were, on their own, huge innovations. But this was moving away from the World War II and saying, let's take what miniatures gamers already know and put it on paper. Put it on a paper board, paper counters. Move and shoot. These kind of ideas, and regulate that with the hexagon in a way that just really hadn't been done as far as I know. You had some shooting, but it was kind of 2 hexes away, I can throw my missile or whatever. Here you have, every weapon type being specifically modeled, etc. And again, this is nothing hugely innovative in that miniatures players were doing this already. But to move it to the paper board and to say, hey, you can have the miniatures experience of detail and complexity and understanding that comes with that without having to paint an army or 2 armies of miniatures and fight it out. And this is important. This has been huge to my life. In particular, because here's the thing, I always still, and I still see the minis as a better solution overall. If I had infinite time, money, and space, and could just get those minis painted and enjoy, and I enjoy painting minis, and build the terrain properly, which I probably would enjoy as well, but I'd have to have a space to store it and set it up. It takes up more space to do it right, even just on the gaming table. Well then, yeah. But for how many periods? How many eras? I could have a Civil War army, but I'd have to also have a Napoleonic army, and one for each nation, and etc. I can't do all that. But I can spend a fraction, probably what I've spent on games as a whole, approaches, what a very dedicated minis gamer has spent on one key era that they've devoted their life to. Or maybe 2 if there's someone who has 2 eras they want. It's hard to find minis for some eras as well. So, as a solution for me, for someone who likes to look over the broad reaches of history and likes almost everything, except maybe World War II so much, and modern a little less, but I like almost everything. And wow, what do I end up with? I can't possibly do that in minis. But by making this shift in the Terrible Swift Sword and saying you can have that experience and that detail, well, that's what won me to wargaming. It was Stonewall. Stonewall was the damn game from TSS that won me over to wargaming. And from the point I had that, I had to have TSS. I was so happy when I finally found it. I got it for like $50, which seemed like a fortune to me. Because I was in college at the time, it was a used game. I thought, used game should be $20, $30 at most, only because I'm at a con. But no, and yeah, it's a great thing. I've got the soapbox. It's fantastic. All right, let's look at another turning point of that nature. This one's a little bit still in the SPI era. Desert Fox. Okay. To be fair, I haven't played, or I've only seen Campaign North Africa. A friend of mine had it, set it up, played it a little bit. And I haven't really looked at the rules to it too carefully. But to me, Desert Fox, and I'm assuming it gets most of this from Campaign North Africa, Desert Fox took supply and made it real, made it important, and made it the cornerstone to a World War II campaign in a way that it's never been before. Before that, games handled supply in a very abstract sort of way. You weren't, and Terrible Swift Sword does it too in its own way. On the battlefield, you've got wagons going everywhere, carting small arms ammunition around, and the artillery all has to go back to the supply training, get artillery ammo, and then redeploy back to the front. And you've got these real nightmares of logistics going on. Well, you have the same going on in Desert Fox, where you're having to shuttle and maintain this supply network to get your supplies forward. Big deal? Well, yeah, I think so. Because when you look at the systems in Desert Fox, not just the supply system, but even the combat systems, you see their influence very directly in one of the best-selling and I think certainly best systems out there today for World War II stuff, the Gamers Operational Combat Series. That's, just a tremendously wonderful, and it seems so different to other people, but then if you don't go back and look at Desert Fox and see the similarities between them, you're kind of missing a piece of the history here, I think. Now, you never hear, or I never hear, any reference going back to that, but that's where I see it. I've seen other games that handle supply, there's no question, but none that handle it in that detail. I would assume Campaign North Africa was the proving ground for some of those ideas. And that proving ground was take it to the absolute extreme and, now can we do something playable, and Desert Fox emerged from that. Desert Fox is a beautiful and wonderful game. Honestly, when I look at the SCS, the Standard Combat Series is Africa, I say to myself, I kind of wish I hadn't bought this, because I think I've got a better game, slightly, in the Desert Fox. And it has some of those same supply considerations. I think the second edition of Africa has pulled back from those supply considerations, and it's not making them as much a focus of the game. They made DAC the game that they wanted to cover, with supply as the focus. Okay, now let's take a look at another one. How about, okay, here's one that took a while. Oh, Great Battles of the American Civil War is a good option. That's Terrible Swift Sword taken and then spruced up. And I have games from that S&T, end of the SPI S&T era. And I've collected a few of them because they're very much TSS. I'm a little afraid of Risorgimento and whatever the chit pull games are. Although maybe I'll be more interested in them because of looking at A Famous Victory. that appears to show the same kind of system to me. Now, let's see. Let's see the next one here. In terms of, yeah, to me, they actually lost something because of the graphical enhancements to the map. The map becomes too colorful. It no longer has that sort of elegance that the TSS map had. I need to peek and see, am I actually videoing? Alright, next version. Okay, so looking at that second era of the great battles in the American Civil War, I also felt maybe the systems had gotten a little too clunky. I'm not sure. It felt like there weren't a lot of differences, but and you can even see this starting with Stonewall, as things like artillery crews began to be handled separately from the guns itself. I don't know, that was just a decision. I understand why it's taken, but it didn't feel like what it represented was more clear. But I don't feel like it actually had the correct effect. It felt like guns became a little too easy to knock out of the combat because of it. And then, okay, so you're going to have to put all kind of special rules to make that work better. And there, another gamer's system derived almost completely from its roots, I would say, that TSS line goes right into the Civil War Brigade series. And in fact, there's no question in Civil War Brigade series and the OCS have taken things to another level. They've worked on that and built on that structure, and I think made something very, very beautiful in terms of the Civil War Brigade series. I would guess more to my taste than any chit pull system is going to be. I understand the desire, though, not to have orders writing. It's kind of a strange thing because in Crusades, for example, there was no shying away from written hidden orders. But as time went on, it became apparent there's a big sector of the gaming populace who doesn't want to sit down and write things down. And I think Mr. Berg has learned that through some of his designs. Things like Campaign North Africa and Crusades didn't necessarily sell or rate as well as they perhaps should have, although I'm sure every single copy of CNA sold out eventually. But it's neither one has achieved sort of the status, and there's almost this, I think there's this drive among some game designers, and I think Richard Berg is one of them, to make these big shifts. You see it in both his successes, obviously, but also in some of his failures, where there's this kind of, okay, here's this new idea, this new way. And if you look at the Conqueror's Alexander, you kind of see that there, where there was this grasp for another big thing. And I think you also kind of see that with the Ancient World games, and maybe with Pax Romana, which I can't bring myself to spend the $50 for, you know. And I'm saying to myself, you know, when it comes to pre-order, it's going to be $55. I'm just not willing to do that, even though it's languishing there in my pre-order bin. But I have so many games that I haven't played yet, that no matter how good that sucker looks, I just can't quite put the money down for it. I don't know why. I probably should. I saw a copy for $11.65 that I went and grabbed, and, well, the person who published the price was like, oh, I didn't mean that, I meant for it to be $50. And I'm like, okay. You know, obviously, I mean, I grabbed it up right off Board Game Geek's little trailer, I saw it the instant it was put, basically, or within a few minutes. All right, let's take a look at some of these others. Well, let's take a look at the third version of the Great Battles of the American Civil War, that chip ball system. I can't tell you anything about it. I really can't. But there's a lot of gamers who are absolutely keyed into that. So again, that may be one of these big shifts that happened. Onward, how about a not so big shift? How about a game that didn't get as much attention as maybe it has in my life, in the gaming life? I'm talking Druid here, which was put out by West End Games, kind of in that period where SPI was gone, and there wasn't a lot out there, honestly. You had the TSR stuff going, and you had companies like GDW still cranking stuff out, but for me, wargaming kind of felt dead at that point. Well, this is a weird little game. This is a game that I think surpasses most of these strategic ancient games that I've seen, say, show up in the... I remember there were things like Hannibal and the Punic War type one, and Trajan, and this, that, and the other, that were fairly popular from one of them 3W magazines, probably the Wargamer, but it may have been S&T briefly sitting in there. Those were okay, I guess. They might have been among the best stuff put out in that era of magazine games, and I've never felt like I trust magazine games enough from what I've seen to reach out and try to grab the more modern ones, in part because they're nearly 10 times as expensive as they once were. I mean, S&Ts went for $250 with a subscription. Subscriptions to these games run you, I don't know how much, but it's like $80 for 6 of them or something. So it's way up there comparatively. Anyway, so this was a decent little game. Lots of little Berg roll on random tables type things in it that added some flavor. I like those things. Some people hate them. It's kind of funny, he actually put out a series of random events additions to the Civil War Brigade series games, which, showed me, okay, it's not just that I like his games, but I probably like the same things he's willing to invest time in playing. Although I don't know how much he plays now. I've heard people drop things around that he doesn't play anymore. I don't know. I see pictures of him playing in his con within the last few years at least. So I don't think you can kill a wargamer completely. Anyway, could just be doesn't have the focus to play at the con with people. I can understand that. I really can. All right. So what about Druid? Well, Druid's an interesting game for me, not because it's fantastic, not because I love it, but because two of the great loves women in my life, that was one of their early games. In one case, my first girlfriend didn't really like war games much at all. She liked that one. That was a big step. And the other one was my ex-wife, who already did like war games, but really liked that one as well, and was very hooked on it. Not to the extent that she ended up on Terrible Swift Sword. We ended up playing the Grand Campaign on Terrible Swift Sword at her request. Usually she didn't like the big games. Usually she didn't want to invest in something that large. But compared to all the other Civil War games, she liked them. Terrible Swift Sword. It just provides this scope, this humongous thing with sort of a stately advance. Now, she didn't like this Brigade series by the Gamers, though. That was too complicated. TSS was just at that right level. Big, but simple. All right. So after that little stop with Druid, let's see what else. Hastings 1066. This is a game that doesn't get terribly well rated, although I think there's some cute provisions in here. I don't remember it all that well. It's again from the TSR era. But you get to kind of give orders, and sort of with a chit selection system. But I think you put the chits down with the units to indicate what they're doing. And there may be a bit of randomness, like a chit pull system, in terms of how you play it out. I've got to get that to the table again and show it, because I remember it impressed me the couple of times that I played it as really kind of capturing that medieval feel where you don't know what's going to happen, and things can be a lot more chaotic than they are usually. Now, we see that in some of the later games, and we've already videoed the Men of Iron and the Infidel ones, where they turn into this really chaotic situation. I think maybe they take it a little too far, but we'll step back from that for a moment. Frankly, I think that they would be better served with a Great Battles of History system, which I think has some chaos built into it, but not so much. I don't know. It's a mixed feeling, because there's something really cool about a battle taking off on one side, about not really being able to control what comes up, which is one advantage of the chit pull systems, not knowing the exact order. You've got the order in the player's control in Great Battles of History. But anyway, jumping back to where we are, let's go back to, how about, Oh, there's another one. This one's not as exciting to me. Veracruz, I've played it a couple of times. It's a good enough game, but there's nothing innovative in this to me. It's got some random charts, but otherwise it's basically a game of its era. This may be very early in his design, though, and that would probably explain some of it. He's learning the craft, and then, wow, okay, so now I can make a war game and I can add my touch to it, but what if I make it my touch mainly, is what you start seeing after that. Okay, Geronimo, and he responded somewhere that this was his least understood game. Geronimo's an interesting game. I did a video coverage of it, and the subject matter is disturbing to some. That's one issue. Another issue is you're not playing one side. So the fact that you're shifting around, it's got a very Euro-ish, Vinci type of feel in terms of not being heavily associated, or History of the World or whatever, but not being heavily associated with something. But you don't even keep it for the next turns. In Vinci, History of the World, you keep your possessions and you score off them continually, and you want to maintain them and keep them good. Here, you want to score your points as fast as possible. You want to score them in the moment, get them. Next turn, you'll be somebody else, don't worry about it. That's kind of a weird situation for most wargamers. It's kind of like being dealt a hand of cards. The wargamer who complains about Geronimo's aspects is kind of like the person who says, oh no, I always want to play diamonds. Okay, it doesn't make sense in the hand of cards. I think to understand Geronimo as a game, you have to look at it as a game. It's not really, you're not being one of these people. You can't associate too much. And that's very disconcerting to the wargamer who wants to make that emotional tie to his pieces, right? I think that's a big part of a lot of wargaming. Okay, but you can still make it for a short period of time, and I've had some really good fun with this game. The interactive card play, the aspects of it, it can be a lot of fun. But it's a big, long game. It's got some weird luck elements in it in terms of it may be hard to stop somebody who gets a certain pick, a draw, whatever, in the game. in particular, whoever gets to be the U.S., that can be either an automatic bone or an automatic bonus for some players. And yes, the players can do a little bit to pick on them, but for the most part, there's not a lot they can do. Anyway, I think that's a much more fun game than a lot of people seem to have received it as, and people watching my videos seem to have had positive reviews to what they saw of it, where they may have stayed away from it because they were maybe expecting something else and didn't like what they heard about it. Alright, let's skim through some of these. Blackbeard. That feels like the same era to me as Geronimo. That kind of later Avalon Hill game. This won some kind of big prestigious award. Maybe best war game for the pre-19th century or something. But it's not a war game. Again, like Geronimo, this is a game where you're kind of, I think it's a little earlier than Geronimo, but you're playing the game more than anything else. And you happen to be playing a pirate. It doesn't capture the spirit terribly well, though. The rules aren't great, which is kind of a shock for a Berg game, but I'll tell you, Avalon Hill can suck quality out of anyone in terms of what it does to your rules writing ability. They really restricted you in terms of, they had to there's no Berg feel to these rules. Now, Richard Berg brings this wonderful sense, and I've said this many times, to his rules. This kind of playful, punny person. It doesn't necessarily mean he'd be that way in real life, that he'd be particularly enjoyable, but his writing is just a pleasure to read, right? So, somehow they killed this. But all the same, and they put it in this format that doesn't even make a lot of sense. Now, I think they had settled on this kind of rigid format that looks like it was based on the... They bounced around a lot through the years, but I think they had settled on a rigid format that looks like it was based on Republic of Rome, which may have been one of their worst rule books ever. The only thing that comes close to it in terms of being bad are their programmed instruction games. Take something like Magic Realm, and you can say, okay, so Republic of Rome could have been done worse if they had done it under programmed instruction, but in terms of the actual just like how you format the rules, wow, they made it really awful, and they seem to have copied that in all their later games, and it's really a shame. I see it in Siege of Jerusalem too. It's like they tried to make the rules as inaccessible as possible. Now, that's one thing. I've ranted on GMT's rules a few times. That's one thing at least GMT has done. They haven't forced everybody into the worst rule set they could. They've allowed a lot of latitude, which is where Avalon Hill used to be. Avalon Hill used to leave a lot of latitude, and I think Berg could have done okay under those circumstances. He certainly seems to have under the GMT rules. I like his rule books there, even if a lot of people don't, because he doesn't always cross every T and dot every I. And when he does, and when he's forced to, like an infidel, it stops reading as well. You can't constrain pleasurable reading that much. Anyway, and it's a pity because I find it easier to understand something if it's fun to read. Okay, let's go on. What about Blackbeard as a game itself? Well, it's an interesting mechanism, kind of like Geronimo's an interesting mechanism. You draw cards, in this case, to see what happens. It feels kind of like a Source of the Nile type thing. You're just flipping, which I played recently. You're just flipping cards to see what happens. You have some decision points in the game. There's no question there. You get to decide, oh, I'm going to sail over here. Yeah, I'm going to attack that ship. Nah, I'll leave it alone. It's scary. For the most part, you're playing your pirate. But you probably want at least one other thing you can move at the same time as your pirate. That could be a second pirate, or that could be a King's Commissioner to hunt other pirates. There's a lot of luck in that game. You can mitigate it a little bit, but it's mainly a game for people with a high tolerance of luck and a high tolerance for kind of sitting around and having things happen to you. it just doesn't capture that piratey feel to me in the way you'd want it to. Although DNRing all over someone's ass can be pretty special. All right. Let's see what we have here. Oh, War of the Ring. Yeah, there's a couple that he's kind of associated with. War of the Ring is one of them, and Successors is another, where I don't know how much of an influence he had on them. In both cases, they're hugely, hugely innovative games. Successors taking that CDG idea of Mark Herman's and applying a very different kind of game to it. And I find it very interesting as a design. I don't really like the game terribly much. War of the Ring, huge influence in terms of the character cards, etc. Really, really not very exciting game to me. Got a video on both. Let's try to push through some of these others that I know less about. Well, let's look at the Great Battles of History. I know a lot about that. I'm sure there's people who know a lot more than I do. I've mainly sunk all my time into SPQR, although I played Samurai. And this, again, I see as a shift. Not as big a shift as TSS is, but it is doing for the ancient battles what Terrible Swift Sword did for the gunpowder era. People have done it before, though. It wasn't as big a jump, but nobody did it right. And you look at games. I have the old Agincourt by SPI, which stretches you back to that. It's almost there. Hastings 1066, it's kind of there. Well, Great Battles of History is really kind of the culmination of that into a system that allows you a lot of decision making in terms of how you want to order your play of units without strictly being in an I go, you go type system. Really, really tries to put a detailed modeling of firing, of melee combat, and the advantages different weapons have, positioning, all these things, formation effects, everything is all tried to be worked in there. And it's actually a fairly playable game, Solitaire. Way, way too fiddly the one time I played it opposed. But there's a solution to that. The simple Great Battles of History. And that'll give you, because I've looked at the rules and it's similar enough to Men of Iron and Infidel, that'll give you that experience, which was fine opposed. I would not suggest Great Battles of History straight up with the basic rules in an opposed situation. It's the main problem I had was too much tweezer clash. Both people are in there trying to pick up pieces all over the place to see what they have. It's just a tough game for that in too many places because, unlike Terrible Swift Sword, it's not fire combat. You're doing mainly hand-to-hand combat, so all the pieces are right up there against each other. At least they're not stacked, right? Anyway, that is an impressive system that I have picked up everything that I saw, that I've been able to in it, which I think is actually everything at this point. There may be something I'm missing, and there may be expansions I'm missing, but I think I've got all the main box games. And then my understanding is that Musket and Pike was kind of a takeoff of the final game of the last chronologically, in terms of the history it's covering, game of the series, which was Lion of the North. There are some similarities between Musket and Pike and Great Battles of History, and my guess would be that throwing away the Great Battles of History stuff that didn't work in Lion of the North is what was fundamental to designing Musket and Pike. I'm not sure. I haven't played Lion of the North yet. I hope to get it on the table. I've played the Musket and Pike games, though. Played two of the box sets there, and it feels very similar. So there you have, so neither of them feel terribly much like Terrible Swift Sword, right? They're much more concerned with these formations, because that's an important thing still in the Musket and Pike series. You still have to keep those Pike formations. And now I see in this sucker, with what I'm reading, an absolute attempt to maintain the flavor of the linear deployments that were happening in Marlborough's time. And I wish to hell that Berg would go look at 7 Years' War and try to put out a series there, because I don't think anybody's really managed a good battle series at this level of detail. Battles of the Age of Reason? Well, I played one of them. It didn't feel like it enforced what this enforces. And you still have that strongly linear concepts in play. So it's as the thing is that Berg wants to capture something more than the technical specifications. He doesn't want to know just how fast a group of men could march at that time. He wants to capture something more, and this really manages it with the line commands. That's something that Great Battles of History led to as well, where you want to maintain these formations. That's important. Well, that's important in 7 Years' War too, and in a sense it is in later things, but the formation becomes less of a key to the understanding the battle. All right, let's take a look. Let's see what else we can pick up here. All right, these are mainly going to be things I don't have, or have but haven't played, that caught my, well, mainly have but haven't played, that caught my eye for one reason or another. Or maybe don't have but one. Borodino, I picked this one up. I was actually surprised this was Berg. I didn't know that when, it's been sitting on my shelf for some while. I'm assuming, again, this is a chip pull system game, so I'll have a couple of different ways to take a look at that system and be able to talk about that. Right now, I can't capture that, and that's kind of a shame, because, this is one of his innovations that's well respected. The Ancient World series, haven't played it, I've looked at it. To me, it looks like a cross between what he came up with in Crusades for movement. Move as far as you want, but you're going to take attrition. And what Imperium Romanum was doing. Imperium Romanum takes the entirety of Rome and their history from the Republican era to the end of the Empire. And, not the early Republic, but, and it looks at it scenario by scenario, each little, 5-year periods or something where there were major clashes. It'll take the combatants in that and handle that. Well, it looks to me like this Ancient World stuff is taking one or a few of those scenarios and saying, let's take this, let's look at it in the detail it deserves. Imperium Romanum is not exactly an abstracted game, and it's filled with chromy bits here and there, roll on sacrificing to the gods, and this, that, and the other to affect your combat. All kinds of little bits thrown in, but not with really too detailed a study of history. Now Berg brings his lens, which is much more rigorous, to the same kind of topic, and says, okay, let's look at the Roman political system and model how that affects the army. Okay, well, all that banging made it so I couldn't hear my camera telling me, hey, I'm out of memory. So I just went on and on and on without caring. So, all right, what we see, though, in the Ancient World is that extra bit, that slice where Berg is again going beyond just looking at the military situation and not just throwing some chrome on where you roll some dice, but actually trying to capture some of the very important aspects that aren't purely numerical and aren't purely I don't know. They don't feel like they're purely luck, right? He may end up capturing them in the same random events tables, where he can help it. You see that there's going to be a design that allows that not to be the case. However, those random events tables, when they come out, always feel a little bit more historically motivated to me than, say, what you'd see in an Imperium Romana game. Alright, onward. I think I've got very little after that here. Riorgimento, which is... I've talked about it before. It looks like one of those chip bolts. One of the things that's kind of nice about it, and Cataphract as well, is that it's got this additional kind of operational game. Now, Cataphract may link them better. Riorgimento, it appears to be just a completely separate game on the same subject matter. I'm hoping Cataphract actually works in to the battle situation somehow. I don't know how it can. But that was the thing that intrigued me with both of them, was I said, cool. I can get the sort of more broader view before I enter into the battles. Again, though, I don't know how that can be done because the battlefield is perhaps set. Okay. And then I don't remember, because I know I talked about Veracruz, but I don't know if it got on video or not. I'm going to leave it alone. There's not a lot to say about it either way. It's an old SPI game. Well, what I do know I didn't talk about too much was Berg's collaboration with Mark Herman, where I know I talked about this in the part that didn't end up there. And you see it from the very beginning of their careers, really, where it seems like Mark Herman joined at SPI a little after Richard Berg, but you're bringing the same kind of desire to really make major changes. A lot of SPI designers, it seemed, were willing to take something and just crank out another game in that same mold. They didn't have that real game design itch. They had the, I'm not sure what the motivation is, but they wanted to get a particular battle or a particular treatment using a design that was already scheduled. And I don't know if these were the younger guys, sent off to do research or whatever. To me, it's kind of funny because I would think, tell you the truth, I would be almost unhappy doing the research, but trying to come up with the designs, the cleverness there, that would intrigue me. So that's kind of where my aim would be, and the few things that I've tweaked with. Now, I don't have that kind of energy and effort to design a game, obviously, but where I have made attempts, it's always been on the system side. Not, let's take this specific battle and model it, but there's some interesting things about this era that I already know about. Let's try to model those and try to get those into place. And then really actually researching the topic to get that delivered. That would be the hard part that I'd rather not have to do again and again. And to be only doing that part and not putting, my own design into play, I'd rather let other people do that, people who are really into that research and trying to represent the battle specifically. But speaking, and then we get to this, anyway, we take their initial collaboration where really Mark Herman starts out taking a couple of Richard Berg designs, in the earliest games that I can see, things like Stonewall and Tyre over in the Art of Siege, which was kind of a disaster, but he takes a Berg design and modifies it fairly heavily still, makes some tweaks. In the case of Stonewall, some of those tweaks end up carrying into the Great Battles of the American Civil War series, second implementation at least. like the artillery crews being able to be shot. And, you know, he's willing to try to apply his own ideas to the system as a whole and change it. And then you go through this long period where there doesn't seem to be any interaction between them. And then they get together and start working on great battles of history. And to me, this is something sort of magical. It's very hard for me. It looks like a Berg design to me across the board. You know, and when you, what's odd is when you start looking at who's trying to pull it back from that fiddly side with, you know, who's trying to make it a less mechanical you know, just flipping counters and this kind of stuff type of game. That's Berg. The Men of Iron series is derived from notes that he put together on how to make simple great battles of history, essentially. I found online a very similar system in its development there. Now, simple great battles of history ends up a little significantly different in a lot of ways because it's covering things that aren't. The counters are different. It's really the issue. But it's hard for me to see. I don't see a Mark Herman stamp on anything, sort of. So are they, you know, are they really that much in mesh on this particular system? And how it should work? How much collaboration is going there? It would be intriguing to me to find out about all of this. And, you know, I mean, Mark Herman's probably someone who's going to get a video of this because he's definitely influenced some of my past gaming, some of the old stuff, especially stuff he did over on Victory Games' side, had some effect on me. And then when we look at my modern foray of gaming, well, so many of the designs that I've been picking up recently, either the Great Battles of History stuff or the, you know, his one huge innovation that is really maybe, at least in modern times, I think it's more of a ground shaker than anything Berg's been putting out recently, the CDJ. But I don't think it's really on a scale that's different from, say, what Terrible Swift Sword did. It may be on a scale a little higher than Desert Fox because I haven't seen much other than the operational combat system that's so clearly derived from it. But the Terrible Swift Sword stuff, you know, to me that's just a game changer across the board. That made tactical games and just brought them to a totally different level. And to me, the CDG has brought things to a totally different level. Whether or not I completely like that new level, I'm not sure. But anyway, but there are going to be a lot of people that I probably can't cover here. One notable comes to mind, John Hill. Another maybe Charles Roberts. These are people whose games I recognize as having a huge effect on the industry, no question. But they didn't have a huge effect on me as a gamer. Maybe I wasn't thrilled with what I found there. Terrible. Maybe because I found things like Panzer Leader and Squad Leader and the old Avalon Hill Classics so late in the day in my gaming day, after I found all the SPI stuff that came much later, after I started, you know, playing the Victory Game stuff. And that's not to say I didn't know about them. I just didn't bother buying them because I had kind of, part of it is there was kind of a, yeah, that's that old Avalon Hill stuff, especially about the classics, not so much about Squad Leader. Squad Leader was respected in its own light. But Squad Leader wasn't approachable to me and wasn't an interesting subject. I'm not thrilled with World War II. I'm not at all thrilled with tactical World War II. So I'm not the person who should be doing that video. Right? I totally recognize some of these men's, effect on the hobby as a whole. I just don't have the personal tie to it to be able to do that correctly. An edge case might be a Frank Chadwick, but I might not be bringing the right lens for Chadwick because I'm not a Europa fan. I think it's interesting looking. I haven't even played it. It excites me to see something that scope, but I would be bringing maybe more of the Series 120 view, and so some of the things he's done that are maybe role playing type stuff more to the light than I would what he's really most known for. So that's probably not someone else that I probably shouldn't touch on. But there'll probably be a handful of these that have really, really impacted my life. They're not all wargamers, by the way. I could definitely see, my second choice is probably Francis Tresher. He hasn't done a lot of games, but the ones he's done have had huge, huge influence on me. Anyway, Berg definitely came to mind as the one I wanted to do first, though, because if I'm going to do one of these, and it's probably longer than I'll do anyone else's, because there aren't a lot of people with 140 games out there.